Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reader's Intrigue, where authors are going to read the first chapter of their book so that we can be intrigued and maybe find a new book to read. Get comfy, get cozy. Let's listen.
Hello, my name is Colin Leonard and I'm a horror writer from County Meath in Ireland. Those of you who have an interest in Irish legends may know Meath as the home of Halloween, a place where Samhain fire festivals lit up the hillsides on the cusp of winter. Many of my stories try to set a sense of ancient fears within a contemporary setting. Such is the case with my debut novel, Country Roads, published by Brigid's Gate Press. In Country Roads, we meet a cast of characters struggling with their life's problems in a modern rural Ireland. To the fore are old college friends Luke Sheridan and Declan Maguire. Declan is already a local Garda in the area when Luke moves there with his wife and baby. We see them deal with new responsibilities, relationships, their own faults and failings. Then this world is invaded by cold and callous creatures that come out of the shadowy fields and ditches, and from whom nobody is safe. I'd like to read you the first chapter. Country Roads, Chapter 1. See this gnarled and ancient hawthorn tree. Its fruits consist of knotted socks, sodden gloves, crumpled sleeves and stockings. These ragged offerings have rotted through the years with the weight of the prayers of the faithful, begging for recovery, for solace, for relief. Sometimes angels and saints might attend here to answer those prayers. Sometimes other cruel creatures gather to laugh at human frailties. This is one of those rare trees in Ireland attributed healing powers. They usually grow beside a holy well or some source of water. You can easily recognize them, festooned with brightly coloured rags and bits of clothing that flutter in the wind, hang damp in the rain and fade in the sun. This tree stands near the small scattered village of Kilcross, just a couple of miles from the house where Declan Maguire found himself living with local girl Denise Weldon and her 3-year-old boy. Declan didn't know when exactly his son was conceived, but he could narrow it down to one of the times they had sex on the night he first met her, fueled with vodka and tonic, cocaine and recreational Viagra. Some of his friends laughed with him about a shotgun wedding. He didn't find that joke funny anymore. The source of water from which this tree sprung had long since dried up. It served as a well before running water became commonplace in houses. The remains of a ruined stone wall circled it, held together with moss and smothered with weeds. In a certain light, at a certain time of night, the gaps between the crooked roots appear as if they open to somewhere deep and forbidden. Cracks, maybe, a split in the seams between worlds. Tradition claimed that this tree was particular for the healing of crippled limbs. Its branches curled and contorted round its trunk like it was being strangled by itself, long ago earning it the name the Twisted Tree. They said its twisted form came from taking on the deformities and pain of the supplicants who tied their offerings to it. Declan drove past it every day on his way to and from work as a Garda in Cromuck, 20 miles away from Kilcross. It formed part of a landscape that he was growing more embittered towards the longer he lived there, surrounded by drab, insular neighbours with whom most of his interactions turned spiky. Like his neighbour Brendan McGrath, a farmer who lived a little further on from the Twisted Tree. McGrath was the type who preferred a quiet, unassuming life, and for the most part got to enjoy one. He rarely had cause to contact the Gardaí. If Declan was prompted to root through the records, he would find only 3 instances in the past 30 years. Once McGrath discovered a car crashed and abandoned in a ditch and he called it in. Another time, someone had siphoned diesel from the tank in his yard and also vandalised his tractor. Nothing had ever come of that but a new lock on the tank and an insurance claim. The third time, this time, McGrath wasn't quite sure what it was he was reporting. His wife thought she heard someone outside the house the previous night, someone laughing. In the morning he found his household bins knocked over and the shed door open. Maybe it was just kids. Nothing seemed to be stolen. He rang the station at Cromuck and reported it as a disturbance. Declan took the call and said he'd drop in on the way home, using it as an excuse to leave early. Declan walked around Brendan McGrath's yard with him and searched around the shed. He took some notes. McGrath showed him the bins that had been toppled. Wind, animals, Declan suggested. McGrath picked up an empty vodka bottle from beside the bins and let it dangle disapprovingly from his large hands. "What about it?" said Declan. "It's not mine," said McGrath. "Someone left it here." "What about your kids?" "They're away at college." "Your wife?" "My wife?" said McGrath. "What do you mean by that?" The farmer's wife came out of the house just then and offered Declan a cup of tea. Emma was a tall, pleasant-eyed woman, as polite as her husband. Declan didn't want any tea. They told him they'd also seen bottles littering the ground at the twisted tree near where he lived, and other bits of rubbish dumped along the roadside. "You should report that to a litter warden then," Declan said, and shut his notebook. When he left them, he drove in the direction of his own house, despite the fact he wasn't particularly bothered about going home. He toyed with the idea of heading back into Cromuck and hooking up with Cleena Casey, but she was beginning to be a bit too much work. He drove to the twisted tree. Might as well check it out while he waited for inspiration on how to entertain himself. The first thing he noticed when he pulled over were the black loops of tyre marks on the road. He didn't like the tree. It disgusted him with its rotten mob of filthy rags begging on its branches. It was amazing that in this day and age people still believed in that shit, but from the amount of material stuck there, it was obvious plenty of them did. The tree was covered in snatches of colour, old sleeves and torn baby grows, as well as a scatter of limp grey tubes that were once socks. Broken glass nestled in the exposed roots of the tree. He hadn't liked the way the McGraths had mentioned the dumping here and on the local roads. He thought their tone was suggesting that he was neglecting his territory by allowing rubbish to spoil the countryside. Declan nudged a shard of glass with his shoe. A flap of feathers and leaves attacked the silence as a large bird broke cover from behind the tree. Lush brown and white flecked feathers housed a pair of intense orange eyes, as magical as childhood marbles. The bird passed over him and flew away across the fields on the other side of the road. Declan wasn't very good at identifying wildlife, but the round face and short beak convinced him that it was an owl. That was peculiar, he thought, to see that in the daytime. Something must have disturbed it. The area settled into silence once more. He lifted the piece of glass and recognised the remains of a Jameson label. There were also jagged necks of wine bottles separated from their bodies. Deformed beer cans hid in the trampled grass. He picked one up, and unfinished lager sloshed around inside it. Then, in the distance, he heard the growl of a modified car engine and started to make connections. He got back into his car, taking the can of beer with him, and drove in the direction of the engine noise. The roads around here were narrow. In many places, particularly in long stretches between houses, the ditches were left uncut. The spread of grass and the bullying thistles and nettles threatened to encroach onto the road if the trucks, tractors and commuters didn't keep up their daily work of forcing it back. Declan preferred roads where the bushes and trees were scalped back harshly and neatly. He didn't care about nesting birds or biodiversity. He'd rip them all out and install steel fences if it were up to him. He came across the Honda Civic idling in the gateway of a field. Smoke and music drifted through the open window. Declan wasn't in a squad car, just his personal one, and the driver didn't realise who he was until he had pulled up right in front of him and blocked any attempted flight he might think of making. Declan got out of the car, hoping he would smell the earthy scent of a joint coming from the Civic, but it was just a regular cigarette. The young man continued to smoke while attempting to screw his features into a defiant expression to overcome the worry in his face. Declan stood close to the young driver and placed his hands on his hips. He held the half-full battered beer can in his hand, saying nothing. The young man didn't turn his eyes to him and didn't speak either. He just stared uncomfortably out his windscreen while the music thumped from the car stereo. The cigarette burnt down to its butt and he stubbed it out in the ashtray of his car, his defiance having not developed nearly enough for him to flick it out onto the ground. "Turn off the music," Declan said finally. The young man's narrow shoulders sunk and he obeyed the order. "Noel Quirk," continued Declan, "this must be yours?" He waved the can at him. Noel Quirk had a large nose for the size of his weedy face, and it crinkled away from the exhibit being presented before him. "What do you mean?" he said through a dry mouth. "You've been drinking up at the Twisted Tree and leaving your shit all around there. Have you been trespassing up at the McGraths as well?" Relief of the innocent relaxed the tightness in Noel's breath. "Not me, Garda. I don't even drink." Declan's hand shot out and grabbed Noel by the chin. He squeezed hard and turned the boy's face upward. "Don't you lie to me, you ugly little prick." He took the beer can and poured the stale liquid over Noel's lips, twisting his grip to force open the resistant mouth. The yellow lager splashed off gritted teeth and down Declan's wrist. "I could arrest you now for drunk driving if I wanted to. How would you like that? How would you like to lose your licence?" He poured the rest of the beer over Noel's face and into his eyes. Noel's neck squirmed and his weak hands tried to pull the Garda's fingers away from him. When the can had spewed its contents, Declan pressed it down across Noel's cheek and nose and spitefully crushed it, feeling the aluminium fold against his facial bones. A sharp point formed where the metal creased and it drew blood just beneath Noel's eye. Declan released his grip and from point-blank range hopped the crushed can off the youth's forehead. "I'll make your life a misery if I find you up to any more of your shit," said Declan as he walked back to his car. Noel wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, smearing blood and sticky lager together across his pallid skin. He spat out the window, then leaned his head down, defeated, on his steering wheel. "It's already a misery," he muttered to himself. So, thanks very much for listening. If you'd like to read the rest of Country Roads, it's available at all the usual outlets, and the best way to find out what they are is to go to my publisher's website at bridgetsgatepress.com, and there's lots of other great dark fiction there as well. Thanks to Randy Lee for giving me the opportunity to read to you, and if you want to find out more about me and read some of my short fiction, go to CollyLeonard.com. That's Collie with a Y, or connect with me on Twitter at Colin Leonard. Bye now.
Thank you again to the amazing author that read us a story, and be sure to check out all the other amazing shows on RB Media. Till next time, bye.